Okay guys, welcome back to part 2 of the gearbox refurbishment for the FTO. As you may have watched the first video, we took apart the case. In this video, we're going to get into that case and we're going to start checking stuff. Now, before I start, I'm going to let you know that I'm not going to go hell for leather on this. I'm not taking all the gears off the shafts, but what I am going to do is check the shim sizes on the input and the output shaft, the differential, look at the quality of all the gears, make sure there's no synchro meshes or gears which have big damage to them, and then I'm going to start thinking about cleaning it all up and putting it back together. We'll keep the rest of the install for the last video in the series, which is hopefully going to be really beginning to put it back into the car and doing a gearbox swap and an FTO. More to come on that in the future, but for now let's get in the garage and we'll start taking this thing to pieces and really get looking at it. Okay there guys and girls, so where we left it before, we left it here with a nice bit of covering over the old gearbox and with the input and output shafts exposed. Right, so we have input shaft, an output shaft and a differential. And I want to get these out of here, lay them down on the bench and check the shims, as I was saying yesterday. Now, as I alluded to yesterday, on a Honda you could remove all these together as a 3-piece. I believe on the FTO we have to remove the first selector fork by removing possibly the split pin, and then we remove the second two as a unit, I think, all together. Okay, so we're going to start off, I believe, by removing the little split pin, which is just at the tip of my finger there, if you can make that out guys. And I believe there's a specific way to drive them out, so I think we're going to want to use something like, I might have a Torx screwdriver which will actually sit on that. Okay, to give you an idea, I believe that's a T25 Torx. Okay, so she's loose now. Let's pop the pliers in there. There we have our split pin. There we are. So it needs a bit of persuasion guys, and then once you can free it up we can pull it off into the side and then that allows her to come out. So what I will do for now is I'll get that split pin and I'll just lay it back in that shift fork. So I'll go back to the T25 socket, sorry, T25 screwdriver, little adapted nut, there goes one, and there goes two. There's one, the other one's gone inside, so we'll pull him out in a minute. So we'll pull these off together, just like so, and we'll grab our split pins and we'll just set them back inside of here. So going back up there to our instructions, although it looks like the bearing retainer doesn't need to come off in the pictures, I believe it does. So let's pop that off now, and then I believe these gears should just lift out. So we have the 3 bolts out for the bearing retainer. We'll pop the bearing retainer over there, and then we should be able to just lift these forks out, lift these gears out and pop them down on this lovely clean rug. So and the bearing is moving now. There we go. So there are your input shaft and your output shaft as complete units. There is bearing inside the gearbox at the bottom there. There is a bush and a seal inside of here. This is the bottom gearbox bearing. That's the one I really want to check for movement, which it seems it does have some movement going on there, but it is retained. So let's pop these out of the way for now. And now they don't have to remain together at this point, they can come apart, but I don't really want them banging into one another, so we'll pop them to the side like so. Right, the next point we want to undo is this lovely differential. So we should be able to lift the diff out as it stands. Right, that leaves behind our case then. We now have an empty gearbox case. Now inside this case there's not a lot of stuff really to worry about. We have an outer bearing race down here for the differential, an outer seal for the diff. We have in here an inner bearing, pin roller bearing for the bottom of the output shaft. Right, at this point I think what I'm going to do is have a little clean up of this surface and get off some of this old sealant, folks. Okay guys, so out on the bench we've got the shafts and the LSD. Now the first thing I'm going to say is I'm not really going to go too much into the LSD. It's basically from the box as it is. The bearing moves smoothly and freely on one side and likewise on the other side. The condition of it looks fairly good. The actual teeth on the output drive or the final drive look fine. There are no chips, I don't think, and no scores or marks which I'm alarmed by. The speedometer drive, which is this thing here, looks like it's in fairly good condition. Again, there's no chips and no scrapes on it, and if I look through the differential, the splines inside there look like they're fairly healthy. So we're not going to mess with him. We're going to pop him off to the side for now, and we will move on to the two main shafts. Okay, so this is the money shot, guys. This is what we're here for. What I want to really do is check the shim distance at the end here. I want to check the free movement of the bearing at the end this side on the excuse me, on the output shaft, and then I'm going to check the two bearings on the input shaft as well. We'll pop the input shaft to the side for now because I don't want to do that one first, and we'll start with the output shaft. We need the manual again for this. We want to look right up the very top of the manual, and we want to check the output shaft bearing specification. So where are we? Here we go, we're getting there. Okay, so in the manual here we have got a bunch of different specs for the play which is allowed to occur in the bearings. First thing we're going to need is a set of feeler gauges. Now I keep my feeler gauges immersed in oil at all times. It stops them from rusting. It makes it messy when you go to use them, but at the end of the day we're using them on oily stuff anyway. So, snap ring for adjustment of output shaft front bearing end play, which is going to be this one down here. If I spin that round into the light so we can see it. Right, so there we are, we have the output shaft in picture here. Number 33 is the output shaft, the roller bearing inner race, sorry. So that is what is just here. This is the inner race which sits inside the gearbox case, and the roller bearing sits outside of that. Now the first thing I've just noticed when I come to look at this is this bottom gear here is in fairly good condition, except for one small dent or one chip from that tooth there. I don't know if you can make that out in the camera, I'll just point to that. There's a small chip there. I'm not too alarmed by that. There's still a lot of integrity in that tooth, and looking at the wear pattern it looks like I'm going to be fairly comfortable with that, so we're not going to freak out straight away. The whole shaft itself rotates freely without making any noise. Right, so snap ring installation on the bottom end. Select and install snap ring so the output shaft front bearing end play will have the standard value, which is 0.01 of a millimetre to 0.012. 0.01 of a millimetre to 0.12 of a millimetre. So that is this snap ring just here, and that looks to me like that's snugged up pretty damn well in there. I cannot move that in any way, shape or form. So let's take our feeler gauges and see if we can even get one in there. So it said 0.01, right, we've got a 0.02 of a mil. Let's see if we can pull him in the gap in between there. And we can't. So if we then extrapolate that up to 0.12 of a mil, sorry, where's our 0.1 of a mil? Let's go for a 0.09. So that would be within our specific tolerances there. That would be 0.03 of a millimetre too big. Can we pull that bad boy in there? Absolutely no way. Okay, so that snap ring in that end, I'm fairly comfortable, is absolutely perfect. It has white dots on it. Let's have a look and see what that says about the white dots. So we're looking at here. So if you notice when we get up the top here, the manual actually gives you some ideas of the different snap rings and some identifying marks that are on them. Snap ring. Right, so we've got a 1.51 millimetre snap ring in the end there. Let's just check and see if that looks like that's fairly accurate. So I would say that that is exactly 0.15 of a millimetre on an eyeball. Obviously I can't tell 0.01 of a millimetre by eye, but that corresponds to what the manualists tell me we should have in this gearbox. Next bearing we're going to check is the opposite end, and that does have a little play in it, but I actually think that might be bearing play, not snap ring play. Because this is the one I would guess that has the large snap ring that holds it into the case, I am going to say that I'm fairly confident we don't have to worry about that one. The next one we can look at is this one just in here. There's a snap ring which is visible to my eyes there, so I believe that's going to be the third gear one. Again, we have a white dot on our one there. That is probably going to correspond to something like 2.8 millimeters thick. And on an eyeball again, that looks fairly accurate. Then I think we have to just check this gear for all the synchro meshes. Right, so we're at the point now where let's have a little look in detail at the gears. So as we said, we saw a little bit of a mark on this bottom gear here, which I think is the first. Okay, I'm fairly happy he looks okay. Synchro meshes. So we have the synchro mesh collar here, which moves upwards and downwards. That allows you to engage the gears smoothly. The synchro mesh is this sort of orangey coloured gear here. This should move freely of its own, apart from the selector fork. So if we move the selector fork down, that selects a different gear, allows the synchro mesh to rotate. What the synchro mesh basically does is allows the gears to mesh smoothly, if you don't know that, folks. Rather than having what we call straight cut gears. If I turn the entire load, I'll be able to rotate the whole synchro mesh. And if I get down nice and close here, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for any kind of abnormal wear on any of the synchro mesh cone shaped teeth and the lead ins to each of the gears. So this will lead in for gear number 2, lead in for 1. So, okay, I don't see any broken teeth. There's no missing teeth that I can see. You will see spaces, folks. That's where the synchro mesh engages with the actual gears itself. Now if I move it over to one side, I want to have a little look and see what the collar itself looks like. There's a little bit of wear on that, but nothing too concerning. Again, I'm looking for broken teeth. I'm not seeing anything which is alarming in there. And let's pop it the other way. No chips on the teeth, no bent teeth, that sort of thing. Again, I'm going to check this actual gear tooth. Now you can do that by just rolling it across the bench. Now that's not perfect, but it's a 20-year-old gearbox and I don't see any broken teeth. I'm not seeing any chipped teeth. The synchro mesh slides easily left and right. The actual gear shaft spins perfectly well. Moving over to this gear and the one next to it, let's have a quick check of them. Okay, no broken teeth that I can see. We're back to the white dot. I believe what we're seeing there on the edge of the flash is normal-ish looking wear and might even be machining. Again, no chipped teeth, no cracked teeth. Wear pattern is fairly consistent through all the pads of the gears as I'm looking at them. I'd say this 4th, 5th synchro looks better, which is not unusual. There's less torque that runs through the gearbox at this point, so. Right, so something that is immediately noticeable, if I've moved this gear selector out of the way, is the wear on the synchro ring spring here. I'll just point that out so you can see exactly what I'm looking at now. If you look at this synchro ring spring, this is lovely and smooth and rounded. This synchro ring here has horrible graunched wear on it. And I believe, if I'm right in saying, I'll just go and double check this, that is what causes the difficulty of getting into getting into reverse gear. This synchro here doesn't mesh properly, and getting it into the gear can be a bit of a trial. So I think one of the ways that people get over that problem is to actually remove this ring completely, which does give you the ability to go into reverse from 5th gear, which is obviously horrific, but it's something that is quite commonly done. We've done it on Natalie's road car and not had a problem yet. So if I can just manipulate this gear selector ring back on where it needs to be. Okay, so at this point we're looking at the reverse synchro mesh. What I've just pointed at there is the sort of spring washer that sits and locks the synchro meshes together. It stops you from putting the car in reverse from 5th gear essentially. Any of you who've got an FTO will know that the manual gearboxes suffer a little bit with a problem with this synchro mesh where it makes it very, very difficult to get it into reverse gear. For some reason Mitsubishi decided to put a synchro in reverse gear. Why? No one really knows. Let's get rid of it. What I'm doing here is I'm prizing that little spring washer up. That bugger's got to come out basically, guys, okay? What's happening there is that for some reason doesn't align correctly and it fouls the synchro mesh, so it makes it extremely difficult to get it in reverse. It will do you no harm pulling it out. You can actually see, I think if I hold it to camera, how worn that outside edge is. That's rough as old boots, man. And that's really what's preventing your synchro from sliding down and going into reverse nice and easily. There you go, it goes in super sweet there. Obviously, you now have the issue where you can go directly from 5th to reverse without anything stopping you. But no gearbox that I've ever driven before has got a synchro to do that. So all I would say is if you're going to perform this process, it will give you a world of change when it comes to putting the car into reverse. But just be aware that, you know, what you want to do is drag it down and put it into neutral and then go from there, right? So this is the other shaft. This is some play that we found on the input shaft bearing on the input shaft itself. That's the nose of the input shaft, and that is actually held into the gearbox by a metal plate there. You'll see that actual part of the input shaft slots through the gearbox. The bearing sits into the housing itself in this little hole, and it should slot down in there nice and gently. There we go. And then that's clamped in. Now you can see there's a lot of play in that. Now initially at this point I wasn't going to change that bearing because of the way that it's clamped in, but That's too much play, and I wasn't happy with it, so that's going to have to come out. Now the top bearing, nothing like it. That's actually quite happy, not got any problems with that top bearing. And yeah, so we know at this point we're going to have to change that bearing. I'm not happy with the wear on it, I'm not happy with the way it moves around, and a new bearing will be purchased. Apart from that, I'm having a quick look over the rest of the gears here, just rotating the shaft to inspect them, and I'm going to start looking for the actual spring washers that hold the bearings in. So in the actual FTO manual, it's going to show you different specifications for those different, they're like circlips essentially. And they use them as spacers when they assemble the gearbox. Obviously there's slight differences in tolerances when they machine these things. These circlips they do the job of essentially taking up any slack that the machine shop in Mitsubishi wasn't quite good at doing. At this point we run the feeler gauges down in between the circlip and the inner race of the bearing just to make sure that it doesn't go in. Luckily on this gearbox none of these things were loose. You know, there wasn't any play that had been built up over the years in them, and I was quite happy to replace everything as it was. Reverse gear there, I believe that's the reverse gear, or is it the reverse? No, I'm not sure, I think it might be first gear there that I'm looking at. No broken teeth. Second and third, no broken teeth. The synchro teeth itself look like they're in good condition here. Everything lines up perfectly. What you've got to be careful of with these synchros is that you don't pop that shift arm off. If you look very carefully at here, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it on camera, but there's an alignment tooth. I think I'm going to point them out just here, where there's a couple of teeth that are a little bit deeper than the rest of them. There you go, you can just about make them out there on the camera. Those 2 channels or 3 or 4 channels there are actually deeper than the rest of the teeth around. When you put the synchro on the gearbox, it has to line up with those channels or it will not go on. Sometimes it takes a bit of time to identify them because there's only a small difference, but you can make it out by eye. And if you look down into them, you can actually see the depth of the channel as well. Again, the synchro itself doesn't look too bad. I'm showing here the deeper channels in the actual synchro itself. And again, you can see the spring washer just at the tip of my finger there at the top of the synchro on, I think this is 3rd, 4th possibly. That's in nothing like the condition that the reverse one is in. You know, it's pretty much perfect. I don't know why the reverse one suffers how it does. Maybe it was a little bit too big when they manufactured it, I'm not sure. So again, just making sure that synchro slides properly. The gears can slide on the actual shaft if they are on bearings. Again, checking for tooth wear on 3rd, 4th. Checking the circlip at the back end of 4th gear there, making sure it's free to move but not loose. Spinning the rear bearing in the input shaft. And then we're just going to check the clearance on that circlip on the rear bearing as well. There's another one of these at the top end of the gearbox just here where I'm pointing. So first check the thickness that they used and make sure we've got the right one in there. And we know then what to check for. Is it big enough? Is it the correct size? And then we'll look for the actual clearance that it should have between the circlip and the top of the bearing race or the inner bearing race. So trying to get the feeler gauge in between the circlip and the inner bearing race there, will not go in. Right, so we're fairly happy. Both these gear shafts look like they're in fairly good nick, apart from the one bearing that we've got that's a failure. The rest of the gears look nice. We've adjusted the reverse synchro. Everything's spinning nice and freely. I am just still pondering over changing this bearing at this point. It spins freely. It makes a little bit of grunching noise, but there's a little axial play in there which I'm not happy about. So you can see how it spins a lot freer than the back end bearing. That's basically because there's a lot of wear in it, so it's looser. But yeah, we'll put that to the side for now, and we will start thinking about moving on to the next part of the process, which is beginning to think about reassembling this gearbox. So we'll just pull the case up. So we've got a nice clean surface. That's the first thing we want to worry about, and then I believe the first thing we want to pop in is the diff. So here's the differential with its speedo drive and its thrust bearing all put together. What we want to do is gently lower this down into the case. It's rather awkward because you can't get your fingers around the outside edge of it, but as you can see, you can get your hand around the right hand side and just gently let it drop into its thrust bearing. It will spin freely at the moment, but it's not sandwiched in the case, so it will move around a little bit. That's perfectly normal and nothing to worry about. And this is me sort of simulating once the case is in place and buttoned up together, you get a much freer movement. And then we'll take both of our gear shafts, we'll give them a quick wipe down. And what we want to do, we want to place the 2 gear shafts together and mesh them together like so, and then we drop them simultaneously down into the gearbox. The problem you're going to have and the difficulty is getting the counter shaft to mesh with the diff. It's not hard, it will go in fairly easily, and if you keep doing what I'm doing here, just give a little play, a little wiggle, don't force it, boom, there it goes, it slots down in there, easy as pie. And we start off the reassembly by putting the input shaft bearing clamp in. You can actually see in this clamp where there's a little bit of wear from that bearing moving around. And then we bolt these bolts up. Okay FTO cats, strange cut in the video here and a funny pause. Different day, same studio. We've got to the point where we're about to put the gearbox case back on and I stopped. and I thought, hang on a minute here, I'm really not happy with that bearing, man. The bearing itself, as I was saying in the video previously, it looks like it's got a bit of wear on it. I'm not happy with the clamp that clamps it down. I went away and I slept on it, which is always quite a good idea, and I thought, nah, screw this, man, I'm not happy with this. I've never taken apart a gearbox before from an FTO, so I didn't have any experience with it, and I decided that part of this whole video series, which I'm going to try and do, I think in 4 parts, would be removal of the gearbox from Natalie's road car or the track car, and then reassembly of everything. So what I've done is I ordered a new bearing. Whilst I was waiting for that bearing to arrive, I decided that I would rip the gearbox out the car and I'd make what is like part 3 of this video series. So I've now done that, stripped that gearbox down, inspected the bearing in that one, which was way better. So I have taken that input shaft and that output shaft, and I've combined the 2 of them, and I've put that into the track car gearbox, which is the one you're going to see in part 4 being actually installed in the car. Obviously, I don't want you guys to miss out on any of the assembly of this gearbox, so I'm now waiting on the bearing arriving. It should be here today, and if it arrives today, I'm going to reassemble the case for that other gearbox. So before we get into this, let me show you what I mean. I've just taken the bearing off of the dodgy input shaft. First of all, before I show you this, there's a right way to remove a bearing and there's a wrong way to remove a bearing. This bearing doesn't need to be saved. This is the wrong way. You do not cut bearings off of input shafts unless you are extremely careful and you bloody well make sure that you don't go all the way through the bearing into the shaft. This is said bearing. So as you can see here, we've got inner race, outer, and the actual ball bearings itself. Okay, first thing we'll show is what I could see from the top of the gearbox, which if you look extremely carefully here, there are some indentation marks on the bearing race, sort of the I don't know what you call that, the cage, the bearing cage. So that was indicative of some sort of wear going on. There's not very much on the other side, but revealed when the balls were removed, if you look at them themselves, they are extremely pitted. So you can see all the pitting on the surface of that sphere there. Right, ignore the crud in there, that's come from the bench. Right, and they're all exactly the same. Okay, so the actual balls, my balls were knackered, man. You know what I mean? You can imagine these balls rolling around inside these races isn't going to do it any good. So if we have a look at the races themselves, they are likewise just as corroded. So you can see all the corrosion inside the actual bearing race there. You can see all that pitting and all that dark marking that you can see there. That is really not tasty, man. So that's why your bearings, you know, rumble and whine and make all kinds of horrible noises. If I'd have left this in the car, you'd have ended up with it rumbling like mad. Okay, so you get the gist of it. Also on the inner race, you've got a similar sort of corrosion pattern all the way around the middle of the race there. So yes, don't cut through bearings like that. If you're going to do what I've done here and cut the bearing off, you've got to cut through only about 90% of the way. You can see that I've not gone the whole way through on that side, and I've just nipped through on this side here. That, what you can see there is a crack. So basically you cut through most of the shell, and then you take a cold chisel and give it a whack and it'll just fall away. It's dead easy. And putting the new ones on is a bit easier. So I'm glad I've done what I've done. Right, let's, you know, move forwards in time and not ignore something like that from the future onwards. You know, I've got to be honest, I didn't expect to take it apart and see it looking as bad as that, but there you are. I learn a new thing every day. So I'll now get towards putting the new bearing on the shaft. I'm not going to show that because I think that that's something that everybody's got their own tools and their ways of doing it. If you want to know how to do that, there's loads of videos on YouTube you can go and see and put how to put a bearing on a shaft. Once I've got all that ready, I'll start assembling what will now be a spare gearbox with those gear shafts and with a standard diff. That's actually what you can see sitting next to me here in pieces. Let's see how we get on. So here we have then what is now going to be the second gearbox, and we're going to reassemble this one and show you all the steps for doing it. Now the reassembly is essentially the complete reverse of removing everything. So you go step by step and you put things in as you took them out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the gear shafts, and they're going to be popped into those 2 holes there. So if you counter shaft, you get your input shaft. Now this input shaft here has the new bearing on it. As you can see, that's in much better nick, has no play in it, spins nice and freely, and is going to do a much better job of making this gearbox run. Easiest thing to do, I think, is to turn the gearbox around so that it's kind of facing you, depending on which hand you want to use, doesn't really matter. And basically we've got to slot them down inside these holes. Now, 2 of the difficult things you're going to have, the bottom end race of this bearing here needs to go in between all these little lovely rollers, and the input shaft is going to have to slot down into its little corresponding hole. So before we pop him down in there, we want to make sure there's no debris in that hole at all. and then basically we just go for it. So the two gears mesh together something like this. Let's see, let's just get that bit of crud off of there, a bit of wood. Okay, so you've got your what's that, 4th and 5th gears here. They mesh together like that, and then the whole assembly comes up in your arms and literally will just pop straight down into the box. Now when it gets to the point where it wants to engage the crown wheel, you've got to be a little bit careful, and it will go 2/3 of the way and then it will feel like it stops. So at that point you want to assess the situation, make sure the nose of the counter shaft is dropping down into the ball bearings, and I like to just give them a gentle wiggle. I'm not putting any pressure on it, folks, so, and eventually you will find it will just pop in there. There we go, this is nearly in. So with a little bit of aid there, that is now situated. Okay, so you've got your two gear shafts. Now at this point, if you try and turn them, they're going to make a lot of rumbling noises, as you can hear. Don't worry about that, I'll come back to that in just a moment, okay? Next thing we've got to do is pop on the clamp for the input shaft. It only goes one way, so make sure you have that orientated right, and grab your 3 little bolts for that bad boy. Front bearing retainer mounting bolt, which is this one just in here, 18 Newton meters as we said. Now I've got a torque wrench which is handily in inch pounds and foot pounds. So foot pounds up here, 18 is 24.4. I'll just wind it in briefly with the old standard tool. There we are, okay, all torqued up. Right, so next course of action is to put in the shift forks for the two main shafts themselves. This is 3rd and 4th shift forks. Now, this seems like it's hard work. It's not. You just need to get things lined up properly before they all go in. Put a little weight down, make them easier to handle. They don't sit like you'd expect them to sit, like so. They sit across from one another. And what we really want to do is move the shafts up as much as possible and move the synchros up as much as possible as well. Let me just do that with 2 hands. One shift fork slots in like so. I say get down on an eye line with it, guys. It's a bit easier to actually see where you're going with these things. Now because we've removed that reversing synchro spring, that synchro will want to drop on you, which is a bit of a pain, but as you can see they slot into the holes quite happily. And then what we want to do is turn the selector rod parts to the next one another and eyeball the shift rods through the holes. You'll need to move the shift rods up and down until you can see the holes. And then we're going to take one of our split pins, we're going to sit them just in here, and I'm going to just give them a light tap to get them started off. Now as you do this, sometimes this shift rod will drop, so don't go hell for leather at this point until you're sure that everything is lined up in there. And it will go in with a bit of force, but it's not really hard. And you want to go until it's just a part of it protruding, and you can feel it just coming through the other side. Job done. Okay, next one. So this one here wants to come up a touch, and it's a lot looser, this one. So this is a 3-hand job. I'm going to have to hold that one. And on it goes. Right, so last one in then is the first gear, I think it is. And this one will drop all the way down, get them around the actual synchro, bring them across and drop them down and into the bush. And then same process, the split pin's a little bit further around the corner on this one, guys. So right, okay, so the arm needs to come back so it's almost in line. If you do it like this, you'll have the shift fork around the wrong way. So yes. Alright, so we get them in there again, same old job. Give them a little tap together. Now when you tap this one in, you want to don't beat down on the actual arm parts, that would be undesirable. A little wiggle. So as you can see, I'm preferring lots of little taps, not one big whack. We're inside the gearbox here, guys, so we don't want to destroy stuff. Right, okay, so then we've got our gears basically in and together. It's that easy, you know, there's not a lot to it. So let's grab a little cloth. Oh, by the way, there's the other gearbox. Woo, tasty. Right, now whilst I'm here, I actually want to make sure we're cleaned up all the way around. That's a bit of nail polish that you can see I put on there because I was just checking the gear ratios of the crown wheels between the limited slip diff and the standard diff. Just give it a nice wipe off. You want your sealant to bind on this surface really well. Right, we've got our magnet in there, that's important, let me not forget that. So the magnet's just placed inside that case part there. It's actually got a covering plate which stops it from popping out. Now this part of the case I've not wiped in either, let's just do that as well. If any of you have watched my tap it video, it's exactly the same sealant we're going to be using here. So I've got the Worth silicone sealant. Does exactly the same job essentially, guys. If it's good enough to seal the cam trays, it's good enough to seal the gearbox. Now I'm only going to put the sealant on one of the surfaces, and I will choose to put it onto the clutch housing part of the case. It's just easier to manhandle, that's the only reason why I'm doing that. I think it tells you to give it a 1.3mm bead the whole way around. The most important thing is you can't have breaks in the beads. So we're going to pop the case on top once we've put the sealant on. And what we're going to do is stay inside of the bolt holes. So I'll start at the very top here. Here we go then. So we're going to take the case, we want to put it down on top of the clutch housing, the differential housing, and we want to make the two together. Now the first thing I'm going to say is it should go on nice and smoothly. Make sure you locate your dowel pins properly, and there's a little trick to getting everything to locate at the top end as best we can. The first thing I want to do is I want to make sure the snap ring where my finger is right now is not going to foul anything as it goes on the gearbox, and I definitely don't want a big chunk of sealant sitting in there. Okay, so down inside the gearbox here, this is the snap ring that you can see moving around. I want to just push it back a tiny bit so that it's not going to foul too much, and it is nice and free moving. That's quite important. I'm not happy with that. It's nice and loose in there, and I'm not going to worry about it being open wide enough at the present time. Turn the gearbox up on its end and get a good grip of it, and then the best tip I can give you is stand directly over the top of the actual box itself. So again, try not to hold the actual surface that we just put sealant on. Gently come down, eyeball the diff, and then as you come closer, eyeball all your bolt holes. You don't really want to pop it down and start moving it around. So once you get to about, what's that, 10mm, you will feel it start to touch on the bearings. Right, and when we're happy, we want to just gently wiggle it and ease it in, and it should, if we get lucky, slot down onto the output shaft bearing, the input shaft bearing, which is there, and then we get to the point where it stops dead. Now it's stopping dead because the snap ring is stopping the bearing from moving up any further. So we get our little snap ring pliers and we get in there, and we open up that snap ring as wide as we can go. Get our cable tie that we had before, pop him down onto the pliers. Comes a money shot. So this is where we close up this gap. So you can see there's a gap there at the moment. It's sitting on all the dowels, it's in the right position. The input shaft bearing is located in the back of the box. The output shaft bearing is not yet. So I'm going to grab the case by both sides, and I'm going to give it a bit of a squeeze, and I'm going to turn around, I'm going to do the same 45 degrees, and it'll get to the point where the bearing has popped up enough. So at this point I'm fairly happy that it's going down straight, and I think we can start thinking about putting bolts in. These will now thread, as you can tell, because there's plenty of space there. So keep moving the whole way around. Now obviously we're going to have the two that go in the bell housing left over. What I want to do first of all is I want to see if I can tap that gap in. Now that gap is there because of the dowel pins essentially, so I'm just going to take a wooden mallet. I'm going to gently, not too hard, not too light, couple of taps either side, and that's taking up most of the gap, I think. Some of it on this side as well. Right, okay, so I am cheating here. I shouldn't really do this, but I don't have the time to mess about doing them all by hand. First things first, I've got this set on the weakest setting, and what I'm intending on doing is winding them in so they're close but not actually fully all the way in. The second thing I'm going to say is I want to make sure, and I have actually made sure, that all the threads are engaged before I do this. If I don't do that and I cross thread one, I will knacker it straight away as soon as I touch this thing. So let's go for it and we'll do them up. Just a pulse. Okay, so there we go. I'm happy that's enough right now, and what I'll now do is now stop being a lazy man, and I will use my hand tools. So as you can see, I've not gone all the way in most of them. I'm just going to come and finally do them in a wee tiny bit more. Okay, I think that's all. Right, so we will torque these top ones before we go any further. Clutch housing transmission case counting bolt, 44 Newton meters, so 33 foot-pounds. Where are we? Okay, I think that's us. Okay, so we've just torqued up all the outside of the case bolts. We need to do the two that remain inside, so bear me just a sec. Lug First thing we can do with that is we can pull the snap ring pliers out. Off comes the old cable tie. If I turn the case up on its end, you'll be able to see the 2 bolt holes we're going to play with. They're just down in there. To do that, I'm going to pop her on a side, although you won't be able to see it. It's the only way I can really get any torque in there. Let's grab our 2 bolts for inside. Get in there, guys. That pile is getting smaller and smaller as we go. There we go. So that's pretty much the case completely sealed and put together, apart from one thing. Let's make one observation. You can see that tiny bit of sealant, even though it's really small, it's squeezing out the whole way around. That's what we want to see. Excellent. We know we've got enough sealant in there. You can bet your bottom dollar there's as much inside the box as there is out. So you can tell from what's there, you really don't want to go crazy with the amount of sealant you're using. Okay, so go a wee bit gentle with it. That's all you need. What are we going to do next? I think we'll show you the problem that you get with the gearbox if you don't know what you're doing. So at the moment, we've popped all the sides together. If I turn the gears, they don't make nice noises. Ooh, alarming. It's not, okay? The output shaft has not engaged with the snap ring yet. I don't know if you can make that out. If I point that out with the pointer here, the snap ring hasn't actually seated yet. Now there's one way to get around that, and that is to grab yourself a block of wood, and you want to use, in the manual it even tells you this, use the gearbox and gravity to do the job for you. So lift the gearbox up, pop them down on the wood, and what you want to do is give it a short, sharp shock, and that will drop down and engage the snap ring. So let's see if we can hear it happen. You heard it there, bang away, straight off. Okay, so if we now check the snap ring on this side, you'll see it has now engaged in the groove, and as a little insurance policy I'll attempt to move it so I know that it slides. There we go, it slides, excellent. So now if we turn the gears, they mesh perfectly. Job done. Job done. Okay, so that's the case back together. Next port of call I would say is going to be the speedo drive, and then the actual shift selector arm itself. Grab your speedo drive. Now this one's oily already, it's already come out of a gearbox. We will grab a little bit of the old oil because we're lazy, and this just pushes down and into there, but don't force it, so give a little wiggle. As with most things, a little wiggle works. There you go, it snaps in place, no problem at all. And you should have in your collection of bolts one little longish 10mm bolt like so. Now I think this only requires 6 Newton meters of force. Basically just nip this one, guys. Okay, it's got plastic housing. You will crack the housing if you try and put it in too tight. I'm not even going to bother using torque wrench, that's impossible. I don't think it goes that low. Next thing we've got to do is clean up the housing here for the shifter. Okay, and then once again we want a nice tasty seal. So let's grab a little dash more of our cleaner. Again here I'm going to do it on the case, not on the unit itself, it's just easier to manhandle. And then we can pop the input shaft selector seal in. Now before you do this, please take just a second just to make sure you've got your spring on the end of the shaft. It does just slide on and off, so it's really easy to miss that if you aren't paying attention. Dig it straight down. Now spring stays up the top, remember. You may need to manipulate things a little touch just to get it all to centre in there properly. There we go. Okay, so it needs to be neutral. You need to slide the orientation of all the selectors together so that it will slot straight down into the bush at the end. And then we want to put in the 4 case bolts from the outside, and then we will check our turkeys. First of all, make sure you can get all the gears. 1, 2, 3, pull them. Excellent, I'm feeling happy with that. Control housing mounting bolts, 18 Newton meters again. So again, I'm not even going to bother the wrench, that is hand tight. Last part of that assembly is going to be the actual shifter arm itself, and my god, this one's filthy. This is a little bit of grease. Now you can use silicone grease for this. The only thing I probably wouldn't use would be moly or copper because they're slightly abrasive, so you don't really want to be doing that. This little nubbin here, this plastic, it's actually nylon I think, little chunk, and its associated spigot needs to move nice and freely because it's the part that does the sort of selection for you from the back. So You want to give the spigot a little dab of grease, and likewise on the sides of this you want to make sure it's nicely greased up. And then this is actually going to sit in this gap in between the arms here. It bolts up from memory to these two bolt holes with these two lovely little bolts here. Okay, so get your little nubbin up and in there. It wouldn't hurt to give it a clean in between the two of them at the moment. I'm not going to bother about this because this gearbox is being sold, and I put a bit of grease in there, so it's perfectly adequate of doing the job it needs to do. Screw in your bolts. Again, I believe these are hand tight, 18 newton meters hanging. Does it move freely? Yes. Can it move in and out freely? Absolutely, 100%. So there's your left and right motion when you're wobbling your gear stick left and right. So that's going to be, I think that's either third or fourth. And then if we go back to neutral and we push them one way, that's going to be first. That's your reverse. Yes, there's no gear that way, so that's reverse. That's going to be third, fourth, first, second. So we can select all the gears. Quite happy with that. Excellent. Reverse lamp switch. Now, as I said, I'm going to be selling this gearbox. I'm going to put this reverse lamp switch in just because it seals the box and stops any crud from getting in there. We've got one bolt which goes into the housing to stop this from all moving around, which we can just pop him in there. And again, he's got an aluminium gasket, so we're just hand tight on him. There's nothing special about that. That stops all the shift levers from coming out of alignment. We've got the poppet springs, or the indent pins, the ident pins, sorry. They go in here, 1, 2 and 3. They again are gasketed, so we don't want to go mad with them. There's absolutely no need to tighten these, over tighten them. And bear in mind, while you're torquing stuff like this, you're sealing it. You're not trying to mechanically hold things together, so a little quarter turn is fine. Once again, select all the gears. Make sure they all go in. Beautiful. Okay, our parts bin is really getting pretty low. So, where are we at, man? There's only one thing left, isn't there? Let's pop the reverse idler gear back in. So, turn the gearbox on its end, which will reveal our large gaping hole that we have. Let's see if I can get this in a light so you can see what we're doing here. So, reverse idler gear can be a bit tricky to line this bad boy up. The first thing you know, it's got a pin on this end that needs to go up in the top of the gearbox underneath this plate here, and it's sort of curved surface. So the best advice I can give is go straight in towards the pin, holding the curved surface slightly towards you. Pop them near the pin and then draw them up into the case, and then use your hand to manipulate the curved surface around whilst you put just a tiny bit of tension on the bolt. As soon as you get to the point where the bolt begins to drop in, give it a try. Now I feel like that's cross threading, so I'm going to wind them back a touch. And there we go, it goes in really nice and easily. You shouldn't have to do that tight, okay? So that now leaves us with a bit of a nip on that bolt there. Give the surface a little clean off. As you can see, there's black sealant on here. Guess what? Someone's been trying to seal this in the past, it's been leaking. Give that the quickest of wire brushes. So when we're ready to pop the plate on, which is just here, we'll give that a bit of sealant, pop the plate on, screw our little bolts in, and then there's only one thing left to do, which is to pop in the end cap, which is just like that. Now, I will be honest, I've been trying to get end caps, can't find what bloody size we need, and I ordered one and it was wrong. So I'm going to just take this moment here right now to get my little tasty ruler on there and see if I can work out exactly what I'm doing, because I've just ordered a 50mm one. I ordered a 47, it was too small. This is a 47mm end cap, no chance. I think we're looking at 48, and I'll be damned if I can find the 48 anywhere. So I will endeavour to do that. Okay cats, so we are up to the final sort of part here. Apart from the end cap, as I said, I'm struggling to get my hands on one of them. We've got some little bolts here left over which go in the end cap. I'll just give them a quick wire brush. Okay, and this isn't rocket science, we want to get a wee bit of sealant on there, guys. And I believe this can go on pretty much either way, but it does have a little tab here which I remember being on the outside, so I think we'll grab a screw and go straight in and take a second one and go down the bottom just to line them up properly. And you obviously don't have to be that tight at all. This is the access panel that you'll use if you're removing that, what I refer to as a stopper. Let me just readjust that. Earlier in the inspection videos you saw me talking about the problem of getting these cars into reverse. If the stopper, I refer to it as, was knackered, That stopper is the synchro spring, to use the proper terminology. You can actually access that from this panel, so I would say I will just show you that in a second. I'll show you the horrific wear that was on the one that came out of this gearbox. Okay then guys, that's pretty much it for the reconstruction of the FTO gearbox. As you can see, it's not as hard as it might seem, and way less scary than they look when you actually look at these things outside of a car. We now have in front of me two Mitsubishi FTO GPX gearboxes, fully assembled, ready to go. This one on the right will go up for sale, and this little baby is going to go into Natalie's track car. This is the limited slip diff gearbox with a good set of bearings in it, a good gear shaft, nice bit of paintwork done to it, so it looks pretty. Not that that'll last, but there you go. That's all there is to it. If you've got any questions or any comments on how to actually put these things back together, don't be afraid to ask it. I really appreciate all the support I get from the FTO community, and I like doing the FTO videos because there's not enough people out there playing around with them, and there's too many people that slate these cars. There's nothing wrong with them, man. You know, you shouldn't expect too much from them. The way they drive and the fun we have with it on track. So next stage is obviously to install this in the car. Sorry, the next stage would be to remove the gearbox from the car as per these videos. Obviously I've done that now. That's the video you're going to see coming up next. I've filmed all that already, and we'll post that one as, let's call that part 3 to this series of 4 videos. And then after that, you'll see me installing this bad boy back in the car with a new clutch and a new flywheel. So that stuff's all ready to go. I'm hopefully going to start on that tomorrow, but I'm knackered. Yes, I've been doing this before work all week this week, so we're on day 4, and I need a break, man. I'm going to go home and get some lunch, call it a day. That's it for now, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, Paymo out.